Alright, if you've been following gaming for a while, you've probably heard about this FPS game that's been in the cooker for a while, XDefiant. Now, I'm not going to try to drop some bull squad to you guys and say, oh, this is the next innovation in gameplay or anything like that. Look, all XDefiant is, you probably played this game before. It's Black Ops 4, but it's going to have ranked play, no skill based matchmaking and casual modes, and in my opinion, better maps that are actually going to have some flow to them. Instead of gigantic maps that's been in all these recent Call of Duties that are the size of a small freaking country, and there's just safe spaces and doorways and flank routes all over the place. The maps actually look like they're designed for competitive play. That's what this game has going for it. Another thing it has going for it too is it's going to be a live service game. It's not going to get dropped, because all these Call of Duties they release, and they're not even finished games. When the game releases, that's basically a beta. So then you have to wait to almost to the next Call of Duty before you actually get a finished game. Well, it's not going to work like that here. This is going to be a live service game that over time is going to keep getting supported throughout its lifespan. So if you like this game, it's not going to be like, oh, psych, well, it's the new Call of Duty. Now that game's obsolete. This game is going to keep going. And the third thing this game has going for it is it has a developer that actually listens to their fan base. Like, okay, so on February 5th, Mark Rubin gets on Twitter and he says, we're going to have, like I said, ranked play, no skill based matchmaking and casual modes, red dots on the mini map, map voting. We're going to have all these things that people's been complaining about in all the recent Call of Duty games. We're actually going to make the game for those people. We're going to listen to their complaints. See, Call of Duty, they don't even have a community manager anymore that handles complaints. So if you have, you know, like you want to complain about a map being like Piccadilly or US Alexis, Texas, and tell them to stop doing that, you don't even have a person that you can even talk to. Like Mark Rubin, he's everywhere. He's always on, Discord or Twitter or whatever, actually talking one on one with the fans about what they actually want from this game. And so that's why this video here I think is very important to lay out like how we're going to talk to the developer so he can create a game that is the best for us, because that's what he's actually trying to do. This game is for the customers first, and then all this other stuff like monetization or whatever comes second. I think, Mark Rubin says that is his philosophy making this game, and I believe he's sincere about it. That's why I'm hyped about this game. Um and it shows. They've recently come out with a developer blog and said that they fixed all kinds of things that people were complaining about in the alpha test that was about a month ago. They said they fixed the net code that a lot of people were complaining about. They fixed factions that were unbalanced, specifically the Libertad faction. It was like a healing faction. Everybody complained about it. They already nerfed that. And a lot of people complained about the controller settings, like the settings for the controllers. It was impossible to like tweak the controller settings where it felt right for a lot of people. And so they've been working on all these things that people are complaining about and fixing them almost immediately. Like they fixed these issues within like a couple of weeks. Um, so like I said, to give this game the best chance it needs, we need to give specific feedback so they can adjust this game to where it's just the perfect flavor that we want here. Okay, so I'm gonna list off a lot of things that when people were giving feedback they didn't think about. We're talking about overarching design philosophies, and these are very important. This is gonna go at the heart of what the game is gonna become. Okay, and I want you guys to remember this when I list all these things off, that none of this stuff is free. There's trade-offs to every single thing I'm talking about. And in my opinion, from my experience playing other games, it does usually doesn't work out very well if you go to one extreme or the other. You're gonna have to figure out where on the spectrum you fall and try to give them specific advice so they land on the part of the spectrum that you want. Okay, so let's get into this. One very important thing, and this is something that people gave feedback about. How fast is movement going to be in this game? Because this game has like kind of a booty slide, kind of like Modern Warfare or whatever. Um, a lot of games nowadays have this, but the devil's in the details. How fast is the booty slide going to be? Because in Advanced Warfare, you had crazy movement where you can just hit a button and speed all the way across the map. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you got games like Halo and CS:GO where you're just turtle slow. You can barely even move. So we're gonna have to figure out where we're gonna be on that because I saw feedback that, for instance, the movement was too slow in the game, and some other people might have an opinion that maybe the movement was too fast. I mean, there's a trade off for it when you're talking about movement. It gives the person who's rushing an advantage because if somebody's just sitting there camping a corner, somebody can just slide around the corner real quick and take them out. But on the other hand, movement also kind of penalizes aiming. You know, it makes it where like this there's more skill in the game related to how you move your character rather than how you just aim. And Halo follows a philosophy of aim only pretty much. It's like if you try to jump, you just slowly float up there and it's really not helping you that much. You know what I mean? It's like it's the game is just like almost purely aim based. So we have to kind of consider like where we want that fall to go, where we want that balance to go, of how much you want movement skill to matter, like juking people out back and forth, and then that related to how easier or difficult it is to aim. That's what we need to think about here. Okay, number two, do we balance this game for the highest skill level only? And there's a lot of games like StarCraft, for instance, where they just listen to the top of the heap, the pro players, and the little noobs getting online complaining or whatever, they just kind of ignore, get good. Right? But maybe for this type of game, that's not really the best philosophy to go at it. I've seen it work both ways from my experience in Overwatch, where sometimes the best way to approach it is to balance for the highest level only, but there's certain situations, and it can get very nuanced, where certain things can break the meta at some of the mid and lower skill levels. You have to consider that the most important thing for a developer at the end of the day is engagement. Okay? It's not balance. Balance does not necessarily equal fun. Sometimes having things unbalanced can actually be more fun in some situations. And I'll give you an extreme example. In MW2, nothing was balanced. There was no balance at all in the game. Everything was completely ridiculous and overpowered. You had the one-man army noob tubes. You had dudes commando lunging all the way across the room and instantly taking somebody out. But you know what? That was one of the most successful games ever. One of the most successful FPS games of all time. It basically built the Call of Duty series. It's what people think about when they think about a quote unquote good COD game. But in my opinion, though, if you was to re-release MW2 in its current state, let's say with like updated graphics, it would be terrible. People would break would break the things that they know are broken. Maybe the only reason that it worked back in the day is because everybody was bad at the game, and so they couldn't really exploit all the things that were overpowered. But you have to consider that when you nerf everything, and you become like I hate to use the example again, like Halo, it's gonna be boring to casual players, and you're probably gonna have a dead game. I hate to tell you this. All right. So when you talk about balancing, you're going to have to consider the fun factor. You can't just consider if you're a really high level player, if you're a really sweaty player, you just can't think about how it affects only you. You got to think about how it affects the player base as a whole. All right. The third question: how complex do we want to be? Do we want the game to be with abilities and ability interactions? Because a game that doesn't have a whole lot of mechanics and things going on is very easy to balance, especially when everybody's running the same guns. CSGO is kind of an example of this. And then on the other side of the coin, you got Overwatch, which has 35 freaking heroes and probably more ability interactions than there are atoms in the universe. And it's completely impossible to balance. You have a monkey running around with a freaking Tesla cannon. You have freaking Torbjorn with a turret. You have, Widow sitting there sniping from a balcony. Everything is completely different and off the wall from each other. And it makes the game so complicated that it's just a balancing nightmare. That game will never be balanced over all ranks because of that. Some people like the complexity and the depth of Overwatch, and some people like the simplicity of CSGO. Again, I think XDefiant is trying to strike a balance in between those two extremes, but we have to figure which extreme do we want to be closer to within this, right? Valorant kind of struck the right balance. They have, the CS:GO gunplay, but then they have some abilities like Overwatch to add some spice to it. And that's kind of what we have going on here. We have the fundamental gunplay of Call of Duty, but then we have the Overwatch abilities on top of it. So we have to, consider how powerful do we want those abilities to be, for one, where they don't where how powerful they are in relationship to the gunplay. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, so number 4, we got: do we balance the game only on the strength of a kit, or do we create weaknesses to encourage counterplay? And we're talking about hard and soft counters here, like the rock paper scissors game of in Overwatch. If you bring out one tank, there's another tank that you can bring out that counters that tank, and that is because that tank has specific weaknesses that other character counters. There's advantages and disadvantages of having that kind of system in place. Well, for one, it makes it where a certain character or hero, or in this case faction, can completely negate another. It's like you pull out this faction, and if they play this faction, well, you can't even play the game. And that's kind of the situation that happens a lot in Overwatch. You pull out Genji, they pull out a Winston, all of a sudden you can't play Genji anymore. Um, that can kind of keep things in check from becoming too overpowered, though. If you only balance for strength of a kit, basically people are just going to pick the strongest one, and they're going to run that in almost every situation. You're going to have, especially in competitive play, you're going to have kits that are just going to be, one's going to be stronger than the other one is. That's just how it's going to be. Even if it's just a sliver a little bit stronger, they're going to pick the strongest one. Everybody's going to run that, and it's going to take away from the variety, but then it's easier to balance when you do that. And then the other way, creating weaknesses, creates more variety in the game because it encourages people to pick other things to counter things, right? But that makes it hard to balance. There's a trade-off. All right? Okay, question number 5. How often do we want to shake up the meta by adding all these new things to the game? And in this case, it's going to be in the form of factions and guns and attachments. I mean, on one end of the spectrum, you got Fortnite. Fortnite adds something to the game almost on a weekly basis because they only care about casual play and they don't really care as much about balance. So one week you got somebody pushing a freaking shopping cart around in a John Wick suit, and then the next week, all of a sudden everybody's like flying around with a balloon or something. Like they have a bunch of balloons are just flying around the map. Then the next week they got a freaking jetpack and a rocket launcher. I mean, everything's going on at once. I mean, they got somebody's running around as Thanos. I mean, they're just throwing stuff. This is like, who cares if it's balanced? Throwing in the game. And that creates a lot of variety. Because people like that. On the other extreme, if XDefiant wants to, it could just stay a game permanently where there's only 5 factions. It's not hard to balance a game when you never add anything new to the game. On a balancing perspective, that's a lot easier for the developer than when you're constantly adding things to the game. So we have to ask ourselves, how often do we want a new faction added to the game that's probably gonna, at least temporarily until they balance it, it's gonna destroy the balance a little bit. It's gonna shake the meta up. That's how it works in Overwatch. Every time they add a new hero, it changes this about everything. Are we talking about once every like couple months? Are we talking about once every 6 months we add another faction to the game? How long does it take after they add a faction for the developers to get that faction in balance with everything else in the game? I almost assure you it's probably not going to be completely balanced, any new thing that they add, as soon as they put it in the game. That's just the reality of the situation here. So we probably need to give the developer feedback on how often we need new stuff to come in the game. See what I'm saying? All right, so number 6. How much emphasis on team play do we want? See, on one extreme, you got games like, and this is an Ubisoft game, Rainbow Six Siege, where if one of your teammates is just picking his nose in the corner or whatever, AFK, you're basically screwed. I mean, the match is pretty much over at that point. The same thing with Overwatch. But then again, on the other extreme, you got Call of Duty, where it's just like if all your teammates suck and you just carry, then you win it. You can win anyway. I mean, you can sit there and just drop a nuclear on the entire enemy team, and it's not really going to matter that much if you have terrible teammates. I mean, you can do that. You don't depend on your teammates to perform well in the game. But some people, it adds depth when you have a team element where, for instance, you could combo your ultimates together. I mean, do we want that kind of thing in the game? Do we want to have like, you know, one faction drops their shield down, and then that allows another faction to come up with a flamethrower, right? Like an ultimate combo, kind of like an Overwatch. There's drawbacks to that, because then if you make the game too team reliant, it can reach a point where it becomes unrealistic for random players online to coordinate together and create an experience where there's actually some kind of coordination going on. Like, to a certain degree, the game has to have some kind of, it has to be intuitive for a random person coming to your lobby what to do. In Overwatch, there's so many different things that are counterintuitive that even players that have tons of experience still don't know exactly what to do in the game. It's like, I'll give you an example. If in Overwatch, if you have 3 people on the payload, it moves faster than if you only have 1 person on the payload. But then again, there's a philosophy too that you want to be ahead of the payload to create space for it. So do you only have 1 person pushing the payload and everybody else moving forward to create space? Or do you try to push that payload forward faster by having 3 on cart? Well, the answer to that question is really complicated. And a lot of people do not understand all the situations where you want to have just 1 person on cart and everybody else pushing ahead, and you want to have 3 people standing on cart. It depends on how far the enemy spawn is, for instance. It depends on how much time you got left in the game. There's just so much going on. It depends on what tank you have. Like Sigma can almost hold back the enemy team just by himself, just by spamming defense. But if you try to just push up this diva alone, I mean, she's gonna get clapped. It's complicated. That's that's the point I'm trying to make. Like you almost don't want to go that far with it. But then if you don't have team play, XDefiant might get boring really quick to a lot of people who like, especially if they're coming from team-based games like Overwatch or whatever. If you just make it this purely like Call of Duty, I mean, what is it really offering for them? So there's that to consider. And then finally, the last one here I'm gonna put number 7, and this is maybe the most important. How much skill gap do we want in the game? Like, and this can be adjusted by the developers pretty easily by just simply, for instance, making the time to kill longer or shorter. I mean, you got Call of Duty, like especially like the Infinity Ward Call of Duties, where it's just like one bullet, you just drop them instantaneously. You just spray it random, and like a noob can get a kill on like the best player in the game. Is this ridiculous? And then, well, you got games like Halo where you have to land every single shot, an entire clip on a dude. And a lot of casual players, they don't like that kind of skill gap being in the game. It's really a difficult balance for the Desert Strike. But in my opinion, with the time to kill, how they got it currently set, and the way they have it currently set is almost exactly the same time to kill as Titanfall, where it's slightly longer than Call of Duty, but it definitely is nowhere near how long a time to kill Halo is. And a lot of times Overwatch, with you got all these tanks running around with 500 or 600 HP and somebody on them healing them, and they're just impossible to take down. It's just I think they're striking the right balance, but from the feedback I read, some people said it was too fast and some people said it was too slow. That could come down to hit registration. Maybe when they fix the hit registration in the next beta, there's going to be less, like, people are going to feel like the time to kill is more consistent, and then people are not going to be complaining about it as much. You're never going to satisfy everyone, and like I try to emphasize here, there's a trade-off to all this stuff. You make the time to kill too short, people are going to complain. You make it too long, people are going to complain. And even when you make it just right, you're still going to have some people on both sides complaining about it a little bit. They're never gonna make a game that's perfect for everyone. That's impossible because people want different things. They just have to read the room and kind of feel out what's best. At the end of the day. So I just want everybody to know from this video. This is what I'm trying to accomplish with this video. You got the beta that's coming around soon. There was a rumor that came out today that the beta was going to be dropping around mid-April, specifically April 13th, I think is what the leak said. That may not be true necessarily because it's supposedly a leak, but assuming that's true, we kind of really need to be thinking, like, right now, what we want out of a game first before we even go in there and play exactly what we're looking for, and see if the game coincides with that. So when you say something's trash or something is overpowered, okay, you need to specify exactly what changes you would make if you was the developer, going by the numbers, and try to get that as a rough guesstimate on what feels right to you. Like, what exactly do you want, like, on far as all these spectrums that I'm talking about here. Like, if the movement feels, let's say, if the movement feels clunky and it feels slow to you, don't just tell them it feels slow, because that doesn't really tell them anything specific. Like, would you buff the movement across the board by 10%? Would that make the game feel better to you? Like, I mean, for example, if you feel like a certain mechanic or a piece of equipment is way too noob friendly, should they just yeet it out of the game, or do you feel like with a specific adjustment, it would be fun to use and be fun to play against? So to emphasize for the last time here, everything has a trade off. I want you to remember that word, trade off, whenever you give feedback to the developers. You might be a hardcore player and you might want the game to become Halo or whatever, right? Where it takes an entire magazine to kill one person and all this kind of stuff, and it's balanced from the top down and everything like that. But you have to consider that they're trying to appeal to the casual players. If you don't have casual players coming into the game, you have a dead game. You have a game where you're going to be playing in your freaking match or competitive match or whatever, your sweaty competitive match with the 10 people remaining that still play the game at a freaking 150 millisecond ping. It's just not going to be enjoyable. You have to bring those casual players in too. I know a lot of people on Discord, from what I talk to them, sound like really hardcore players. They're among those like elite players, kind of like. And they're really not getting a whole lot of input from casual players. I kind of want you guys to put yourself in the casual player's shoes when you play the beta and think of yourself kind of like a COD noob like you was back in the day. How you would perceive this game if you was to be playing it back in the day, right? I want you guys to think about it from that perspective as well, because those casual players are really important for the lifeblood of your game overall. You know, I believe when Mark Rude made that tweet on February 5th, and he was talking about both ranked mode and casual mode with no skill based matchmaking, that's a sign he's trying to cook this game up to strike a good balance between a lot of the extremes that I laid out in this video and try to fine tune us where it keeps, try to fine tune the game where it keeps as many people happy as possible. When the beta drops, I think we can do this. I think we can give that specific feedback that's going to give the developers an idea of exactly what game that we want, and they're going to make that game.